The stagecoach door flung open, slamming against the frame with a clap that echoed through the canyon air. Eliza Nez didn't wait for help. She jumped down onto the packed red clay road boots, striking hard, the impact rattling all the way up her spine. Wind tugged at her long coat, dragging the hem through the dust like a warning. Her wide-brimmed hat nearly flew off. She grabbed it in time, holding it low over her brow as the grit stung her eyes. Her breath came fast, her heart faster. The smell of iron, sweat, and horses hit her all at once, sharp and unkind. "I told you the driver barked from the seat above Red Bluff ain't no place for soft types, even less for women traveling alone." "I'm not alone," Eliza said, lifting her travel case with both hands. It was heavier than it looked, not because of clothes, but because of what lay hidden beneath layers of linen forceps, scalpels, syringes, and a bone saw wrapped in oilcloth. Instruments that could save lives, or end them. The man spat near her boots and snapped the reins. The coach rolled off its wheels, carving fresh lines in the dust as it disappeared into the distance. She stood there, suddenly alone. The only movement was the wind howling between the sandstone cliffs and the shutter slamming on the general store across the street. Red Bluff looked like a forgotten scar on the edge of the New Mexico territory. One main road, a silver mine to the west, a chapel with broken windows, and eyes. Eyes behind curtains from saloon doors under hat brims. She walked forward. Each step was a choice. One more away from the name they tried to erase. One more toward the woman she wasn't sure she had the right to be anymore. A man stepped out of the store, tall, broad, with silver in his dark hair, and the kind of eyes that watched first and judged later. He didn't smile. "Eliza Nez," he asked, voice deep, steady, the syllables careful on his tongue. She stopped a few feet from him. "That's right. I'm Daniel Haskett." He motioned to the building behind him. "This is my store. Upstairs is yours for as long as the arrangement suits you." She didn't answer right away. She shifted the case in her hand. "Can I take that?" he asked. "No." The answer was too quick, too sharp. She forced a thin smile. "I mean, I've got it. Thank you." Daniel raised one brow, then nodded. "Come on, then. Storm's not far off." The wind picked up again as she followed him, carrying the scent of rain and something darker, something old and buried in the rock. The smell of things that couldn't stay hidden forever. Inside the store, it was dim and cluttered with dry goods, sacks of flour, barrels of nails, tools hanging from beams. The air was thick with the scent of leather and tobacco. Behind the counter, a girl no older than 17 froze mid-motion, eyes pinned on Eliza like she was a ghost. Eliza gave a small nod. The girl didn't return it. "She's my niece," Daniel said. "Martha helps out while her mother rests." Then, with a glance at the stairs, "Rooms are up." Eliza climbed, careful not to let the case knock the rail. The stairs creaked in protest beneath her boots. At the top, Daniel opened a door and stood aside. The room was plain, clean. A small bed with iron rails, a washstand with chipped enamel, a table with a single oil lamp and a chipped mug. Someone had placed wild desert flowers in a mason jar by the window. Their scent didn't quite cover the faint trace of lye in the floorboards. "I had Mrs. Tenorio clean," Daniel said. "She runs the boarding house. Said you'd want something simple." Eliza nodded. "It's more than enough." He set a brass key on the table beside the flowers. "You've been through a lot to get here. I figure the next few days you might just want quiet, but I'd like to talk tomorrow about what the next 3 months might look like." "That's fair." He hesitated. "Then you came a long way for a fresh start." "Not many people do that, unless they've got something worth leaving behind." Her throat tightened. She made herself meet his eyes. "I believe in clean slates, Mr. Haskett." He nodded once. "Then I'll leave you to it." As the door clicked shut behind him, Eliza locked it and dropped her case to the floor. Her hands were trembling. She couldn't pretend it was the wind. She bent fingers, fumbling with the latches. When the case opened, the soft shine of steel gleamed up at her. She ran her hand across the top layer, forceps clamps, the familiar weight of the stethoscope she hadn't used in nearly 2 years. Memories rose like smoke-white walls, a blood-soaked gown, the hollow silence of a courtroom. A name stripped from a registry. A life collapsed. "I'm not her anymore," she whispered to the instruments. But they didn't care. They were just tools, waiting for hands, waiting for purpose. She shut the case and shoved it beneath the bed, out of sight. Then she stood staring out the window as the sky darkened with storm clouds rolling in over the ridges. Red Bluff shimmered beneath them, unaware of the secret now hidden in its heart. A knock came just after sunset. She froze, then stepped to the door and opened it. Daniel stood there again, holding a small tray. "Figured you hadn't eaten." The tray held cornbread beans and a tin cup of strong-smelling coffee. "You didn't have to," she said. "No, but folks don't settle in well on an empty stomach." He handed it over. "I know this ain't Boston, Miss Nez. Red Bluff's hard land. But sometimes hard land gives us a place to plant roots when nothing else will." She took the tray. "Thank you." He nodded again and left without another word. She closed the door, heart beating strangely fast. She didn't eat right away. She sat on the bed, holding the warm tray in her lap, listening to the distant sound of hammering coming from the direction of the mine. Even at this hour they worked, pushing deeper into the earth, digging for something valuable, something hidden. The wind moaned around the building, and in the silence between gusts a sound came that made her spine stiffen, a deep, low boom. Then another, then screaming. She set the tray down, ran to the window, and threw it open. People were pouring into the street. A bell began to ring, sharp, fast, urgent. From the west, the mine road filled with dust and shadows moving fast. Eliza's fingers tightened on the windowsill. The mine had collapsed. Again. And this time she was no longer the woman who could afford to hide. "If you can't stop the bleeding, then step aside. I've already buried one name. I won't bury a man just to keep it secret." Eliza's boots hit the stairs with the weight of decision. Down the creaking steps, through the narrow store, out into the red-smeared chaos of the street. Rain had started again, thin, fast needles slicing across the dust, mixing it into rust-colored paste beneath her heels. The ringing bell at the chapel tower beat without rhythm, wild and panicked. People ran, stumbled, shouted. A woman clutched a baby to her chest and screamed a name over and over. A horse broke loose from its hitching post and galloped toward the ridge. The whole town seemed tilted, sliding toward the smoke curling up from the far edge of the mine road. She gripped the case in her arms like a shield. The Red Bluff Silver Company mine entrance loomed ahead. Its timber frame cracked at the joints, as if the earth had turned against itself. Men staggered through the dust, bleeding and covered in grit. One man dragged another by the arms, the injured one's leg bent sideways, bone gleaming white through torn flesh. "Get Doc Evans," someone shouted. "I did, he's comin', but he's old. Ain't gonna make it fast enough." Eliza pushed through the cluster, brushing past elbows, ignoring stares. Her lungs burned. The weight of the case bruised her hip with every step. Still, she didn't stop. The man with the broken leg moaned, his eyes wide, breath coming in short, wet bursts. "Lay him down here now." Eliza dropped to her knees in the mud beside him, opening the latches of the case with a practiced snap. The sound cut through the noise around her like gunfire. Tools glinted in the gray light, steel sharp, terrible. The man holding the wounded miner blinked down at her. "Who the hell are you? Someone who can help," she said, already pulling out what she needed. "What's his name, Tommy?" "Tommy Reeves." Tommy's face was ashen. His lips were tinged blue. His pants were soaked with blood and rain. She checked his pulse. Fast and weak. The fracture was severe, compound, and exposed. If she waited, he'd bleed out or lose the leg to infection. "I need clean water. Bandages. Whiskey, if anyone has it. And strong hands." 4 of them. A few seconds of silence passed before anyone moved. Then a boy sprinted toward the livery for supplies. Someone else ran to the saloon. A grizzled man ripped his shirt to make bandages. Voices began to rise again, new panic, more bodies being dragged from the mine entrance. She didn't look. She couldn't afford to. Eliza Daniels' voice cut through the air. She looked up. He was soaked boots, caked with mud, face smeared with dust. He froze when he saw the open case, the gleaming tools, her hands already bloody. "What are you?" his voice cracked. "Help me or move," she said, not waiting for an answer. Daniel dropped to his knees, grabbing Tommy's shoulders. "Tell me what to do. Hold him down. He'll thrash when I set the bone." She looked at 2 miners standing nearby, stunned. "You grab his hips. You his other leg. You there." She locked eyes with a young man shaking where he stood. "What's your name, Jake?" "Jake Morrison." "You're on his ankle. When I say pull, you pull straight. Steady. Don't jerk. Don't stop. Can you do that?" Jake nodded, trembling. Eliza took a deep breath, positioned her hands around the mangled leg. The rain blurred her vision, but she didn't blink. This moment wasn't new. It was the same every time, the stillness before the scream, the quiet before the storm broke inside her. 1, 2, 3, pull. Jake pulled. Tommy howled. Daniel held him down with a grimace of pain etched into his face. Eliza guided the bone ends back into alignment, feeling for the exact click there. She heard it, felt it. A shudder ran through her body as the limbs straightened. Her fingers didn't shake. "Not yet. Don't let go. Keep him still." She cleaned the wound as best she could in the rain, then poured whiskey over it. Tommy flinched. Her hands moved fast, stitching the gash with steady precision, wrapping the leg tight with splints and cloth. "Water's here," someone yelled. Eliza didn't look up. "Give it to the man coughing blood," she said, "and tell them to get Doc Evans now." The crowd parted again. A hunched figure appeared in the raincoat, too thin, steps too slow. Doc Evans. He reached the injured with a face as gray as the sky, his bag dragged from his hand. Eliza glanced at the next man being brought out, his chest heaving, blood bubbling at his lips. Lung puncture. Evans stood over him silent. His hands trembled. He looked at Eliza. She rose to her feet, soaked through to the skin. "He needs decompression." Second rib space, mid-clavicular line, big bore needle. Doc Evans looked down at his hands, looked back at her. "You do it," he said quietly. "Your hands are better." Eliza stepped past him, pulled the needle from her own case, cleaned it fast, and inserted it in one clean motion. A hiss of air. The man gasped, breathing leveled. A quiet rippled through the crowd. Even the bell stopped. "She saved him," someone whispered. Doc Evans sat down hard on a crate, wiping his face with a shaking hand. More men came. More wounds. Eliza barked orders, called for hot water, cloth, thread, whiskey, anything they could find. She turned the livery stable into a makeshift hospital, moving bodies in separating the walking wounded from the unconscious. Miri Tenorio appeared with arms full of herbs and soaked linens. You'll burn out, she warned. Eliza didn't answer. She didn't stop. By the time the last man was laid down and the final stitch pulled, Eliza could barely feel her arms. The stable smelled of blood and wet hay. Lamps flickered in the gloom. People sat in silence, watching, waiting, whispering. Doc Evans finally stood. "Miss Nez," he said hoarsely. "I need a word." She followed him outside. The sky had cleared slightly. Red Bluff shimmered under moonlight. "You're not who you said," he murmured. "You're not a school teacher." "No," she said. "You trained in Boston, yes. You're a doctor." "I was." He sighed. "You're the reason they're still breathing in there." Eliza didn't reply. "I'll tell the town you worked under me," he added. "For now. But that won't hold long." "I know. You'll have to decide soon whether you run again." A loud, fast trot cut through the moment. A courier rode up, dust flying behind him. Telegram from Santa Fe, he called, dismounting. He handed the slip to Doc Evans, who read it once, then looked up slowly. "There's sickness spreading," he said. "Fever and rash out at the mine barracks." Eliza felt it in her bones before he spoke the next word. "Typhus." "You say you're a school teacher, but your hands don't tremble when cutting a man open, only when lying." Eliza stood outside, the livery hands still stained with blood and iodine wind tugging at the edges of her coat. The storm had broken into silence. The only sound now came from the moaning of the wounded inside and the slow rustle of the desert grass brushing against the fence line. Deputy Hank Crow leaned against the fence post, arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't spoken until now, hadn't needed to. He watched everything. That quiet way of his cut deeper than questions. Eliza turned to face him fully, the air sharp with the scent of rain and horses. "I didn't come here to fool anyone, just to start over." Crow's dark eyes narrowed. "People don't start over in Red Bluff. They run to it." She said nothing. Her hands, still raw and reddened from scrubbing in cold water, hung limp at her sides. Her case lay at her feet, sealed shut once more, like the secret it carried. Crow pushed away from the fence and stepped closer, his boots crunching over gravel. "Don't mistake me. I'm not here to run you out. I've seen men spill more blood than that mine ever has, but you should know truth has long legs in this town. It'll catch up to you." "I know," Eliza said, her voice flat. "Then get some rest," Crow murmured. "Tomorrow's not slowing down." He tipped his hat and walked off into the dark. Eliza turned back to the stable. She stepped inside, her boots echoing on the wooden floor. The space had transformed. Hay had been cleared for stretchers. Blankets covered the wounded. Lanterns threw flickering shadows over the rough planked walls. The livery smelled of sweat disinfectant and quiet pain. Daniel stood near the far stall, where Tommy Reeves lay sleeping, his leg braced and bound. The color had returned to the boy's face, just a touch, like a ghost of life moving back in. When he saw Eliza, Daniel's expression hardened. He didn't speak as she approached. Not right away. She reached for a rag from the table and scrubbed her hands again. The water was cold. Her skin cracked. "You didn't even hesitate," Daniel said finally. She kept her eyes down. "I didn't have time to. I watched you sew that boy's leg shut like you've done it 100 times. I have. You said you were a school teacher." Eliza stopped scrubbing. "I taught," she said quietly, "anatomy in a nursing program." "It wasn't a lie. It was a corner of a lie," he said. "And you've been living inside it." She looked at him, then really looked. The anger in his eyes wasn't the kind that came from betrayal. It was the kind born of knowing someone you trusted was still hiding. "I was a surgeon," she admitted. "In Boston. Licensed, trained, respected, until a patient died on my table. Her husband was powerful, angry. He accused me of incompetence, claimed I botched the procedure. The board didn't care about truth, just about pressure. They stripped my license, made sure no hospital would hire me again. Daniel stared at her jaw, tense. So you ran? Yes. You came here to disappear. She met his eyes, and I was doing just fine with it until today. He didn't answer right away. Then he glanced back at the row of injured miners. Funny thing, he said. None of them seemed to care whether you had a license. They just wanted to breathe. Before Eliza could respond, footsteps approached. Doc Evans entered, clutching a folded piece of paper and looking older than he had that morning. Telegram, he muttered. From Santa Fe. Reports of fever and rash. One case confirmed typhus. Daniel took a step back, brows furrowed. Here started in the lower barracks, Evans said. The mining camp. Conditions are perfect for it, filthy bedding, close quarters, tired men. It'll move fast. Eliza felt the chill settle in her bones. I've seen typhus before, she said. Back east, spread like wildfire in immigrant quarters. It doesn't care about borders or rules. Evans nodded. Then we've got to act. Fast. We need to isolate the sick, burn infected blankets, boil water, wash everything down with lye. Close the saloon, the church, schoolhouse, anywhere people gather. Evans hesitated. You'll need the town council's approval for that kind of disruption. Then call them, Eliza said. Or I'll do it myself. Evans gave her a long look. They won't take it kindly at you standing in front of them, not with everything still muddy from today. I didn't come here to please them. I came to survive. Her voice dropped, and they will too, if they listen. Daniel stepped forward. If you go into that meeting, they'll rake you over. You know that, right? I do. They'll ask who you are, why you're really here, and you'll have to answer. Eliza met his gaze. I'd rather face them than dig graves for their children. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Doc Evans cleared his throat. Meetings at sunrise. Town hall. I'll be there, Eliza said. As she turned to gather her things, Daniel placed a hand on her arm. It stopped her cold. I don't like being lied to, he said, but I also don't like watching people die when they don't have to. Her heart thudded in her chest. I don't know who you were, he said quietly, but I saw who you were today. She swallowed hard, then nodded. Outside, the air had cooled. Stars emerged above the jagged ridge. Somewhere far down the slope, the mine flared with torchlight as men worked through the night to stabilize the shaft. Eliza walked slowly back toward the store, every muscle aching, the case now feeling twice as heavy as before. As she reached the stairs, a figure emerged from the shadows, Miri Tenorio shawl wrapped tight around her eyes, dark with knowledge. You stirred the pot good today, Miri said. It needed stirring. Maybe, Miri said. But some folks drown in the steam before they ever taste the stew. Eliza gave her a tired smile. You have a way with words? I have a way with people, Miri replied. They don't fear you yet. But they don't love you either. Not enough to listen when it counts. Eliza opened the door. Then I'll make them listen. Miri watched her for a moment longer, then nodded. Get some sleep, Doc, she said, the word deliberate. Red Bluff wakes mean. Eliza closed the door behind her, heart pounding in her ears. She hadn't come here to fight. But Red Bluff was a town that didn't survive on silence. And neither would she. It's typhus, she whispered. And if we don't act fast, this town will rot from the inside out. The sun hadn't cleared the ridge yet when the doors to Red Bluff's town hall creaked open. The long, narrow building had once been a church, then a saloon, then when people finally decided they needed rules, a hall for meetings they mostly ignored. Today, though, it was full. Miners with bandaged arms, shopkeepers clutching their hats, wives sitting stiffly, children held close. At the front of the room behind a wide table sat the council, 3 men and 1 woman, all tired, all weary. And standing just beside them, arms crossed and jaw tight, was Clayton Mercer, head of the Red Bluff Silver Company. Eliza stood at the center, her hands bare and red from the morning's scrubbing sleeves rolled to the elbows. Doc Evans had insisted she speak. Miri Tenorio sat in the back, nodding silently, as if she already knew what was coming. Eliza didn't waste time. "We have 3 confirmed cases of typhus," she said, her voice clear despite the dry in her throat. 2 miners and a cook from the barracks. There will be more. A lot more, if we don't act now. Whispers sparked across the room. "I've seen this before. Once it starts, it spreads fast, through lice, through close quarters, through shared water, dirty linens, skin contact. You don't have to go into the mine to catch it. All it takes is a handshake and a little sweat." Clayton raised a hand. "Let's not start a panic." "This isn't panic," Eliza shot back. "It's math." The room went still. "I'm calling for a temporary shutdown of all non-essential gathering places, saloon, chapel, schoolhouse. We need quarantine zones, daily inspections, bedding, burned water boiled, and the infected moved to isolation." "You want us to close the whole town," one of the councilmen said, voice tight. "That'll choke every business we've got." Eliza nodded. "For a week. Maybe 2. Mercer stood. "A shutdown of the mine isn't just bad business, it's starvation. Those men don't dig, we don't eat. Those men keep digging, and they'll carry this disease back home on their clothes, on their skin. They'll spread it to their wives, their children, the store clerk, the teacher, the preacher, and by the time you notice, there won't be enough ground to bury them all." The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was fear. Miri stood slowly in the back. "Let her show you," she said. "Come with us. See it." Eliza watched the council shift in their seats. Finally, the woman Rosalind Crane spoke. "If we go out there," she said, "and what you say is true, we'll do as you ask. But if not—" Eliza met her gaze. "Then I'll leave town before sundown." Outside, the sun had begun its climb, casting the mine road in long, ominous shadows. The barracks reeked before they even stepped through the door. Sweat. Rot. Something sour beneath it all. Eliza held a cloth to her nose, though it didn't help much. Inside, bodies lay scattered in bedrolls too thin for winter. Some men burned with fever. Others stared at the ceiling with glassy eyes, murmuring words no one understood. Lice scurried through hair and beards. Rash marked skin in angry red splotches. One man sat on a crate, rocking, rubbing his arms raw. When he saw Mercer, he lurched forward. "Boss," he rasped. "I ain't lazy, just cold, so cold." Mercer looked like he'd been punched. He stepped back quickly, bumping into the doorframe. One of the councilmen gagged. Another turned pale. Eliza knelt beside the man, pressing fingers to his pulse. "He'll be dead by nightfall," she said. "And if we wait longer, he won't be the only one." They returned to the town in grim silence. By noon, orders had been signed. Signs hung, saloon closed, chapel closed, school suspended. Blankets piled outside homes were burned. Eliza and Miri led teams through every street, scrubbing, inspecting, enforcing. Deputy Crow rode between houses, knocking on doors with a cold stare and quiet steel. Children cried. Merchants shouted. Some townsfolk begged to keep their quilts, their coats. It was still winter in the high desert. Nights fell like teeth. But Eliza didn't bend. "This is bigger than comfort," she told a sobbing mother whose son had started to cough. "This is life and death." She carved out quarantine zones at the edge of town, turned the old blacksmith's shed into an infirmary. Miri worked at her side, crushing herbs, boiling water, muttering prayers in Spanish and Apache both. Doc Evans moved slower, but his eyes still carried wisdom. He said little, just nodded when needed. Daniel showed up near dusk sleeves, rolled sawdust in his hair. "You still need beds?" he asked. She blinked. "Yes." "Then I'll build them." And he did. All night. By the third day, the sick multiplied. Shopkeeper's wife, stable boy, a child from the schoolhouse who hadn't been near the mine. Eliza didn't sleep. She moved like fire, fast, sharp, everywhere, cleaning wounds, forcing fluids, whispering names. At night, she sat on the infirmary floor, fingers curled around a cup of bitter coffee, watching the stars disappear behind the smoke of her exhaustion. That's when Miri said it. "You can't keep this up." Eliza didn't look at her. "I have to. You'll break. Then I'll break later." Miri touched her shoulder. "You're not the only one who can carry things." Eliza nodded just once. But she still didn't rest. On the fifth day, the town gathered in the open square to pray. Quiet voices lifted into the wind, pleading for mercy. Eliza stood at the back, arms crossed, eyes on the people, not heaven. She saw the desperation. The way folks looked at her now, not as a stranger, but not quite as their own either. Something in between. Something that scared them. After the service, Clayton Mercer approached her, face unreadable. "I heard you gave up your license," he said. Eliza stared at him. "You have spies now, I have ears. And long memories. What do you want, Mercer?" His jaw tightened. "A solution." "You want a cure?" she asked bitterly. "You want the dead to sit up and walk out of that shed?" "You want a neat, clean ending to this? I want it to stop," he growled. "So do I." He stepped closer. "You're doing more good than harm. I won't say it again, but I see it. I won't block you anymore." Then he walked away. That night, the coughing worsened. A young man, barely 20, seized in his bed and died before Eliza could reach him. She stood over his body, fists clenched, throat raw from shouting. Miri came to her side. "You did everything you could." "It wasn't enough," "No," Miri said softly. "But tomorrow comes anyway." And it did. With a knock at the clinic door. A stranger in a dark coat carrying a leather satchel stood tall on the threshold. "Eliza Nez?" he asked. "Yes. I'm Dr. Lucian Hart, Territorial Health Office. I'm here to investigate the outbreak and the reports of an unlicensed physician practicing in Red Bluff." "They say you're cursed," Miri said. "But I say a storm can wash clean just as much as it destroys." The stranger stepped through the clinic doorway like judgment wrapped in a wool coat. Dr. Lucian Hart, tall and precise, removed his hat and scanned the room with quick, cold eyes. He said nothing as he took in the improvised infirmary. Men wrapped in sweat-soaked sheets, children curled in corners. Miri stirring something thick and bitter in a pot on the stove. Eliza stood in the center sleeves, rolled hands still wet from washing linens, the steam from the basin curling around her arms like smoke. "You've been busy," Hart said. "Too busy to waste time," Eliza replied. Hart gave her a tight smile that didn't touch his eyes. "I've received a formal complaint, anonymous in name, but not in tone. Accusations of unlicensed practice, improper procedures, negligence." She didn't flinch. "You're not here because someone's worried about negligence. You're here because I made someone in Boston uncomfortable." Hart tilted his head. "You admit you're practicing medicine without a license?" "I'm treating the sick in a town that's drowning." He took a small notebook from his coat and scribbled something with a silver pen. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now. Hart didn't respond. Instead, he walked past her, moving slowly through the room. He stopped beside Tommy Reeves, whose fever had finally broken. The boy slept, curled into himself, breathing shallow but steady. The splint on his leg was clean, tight, precise. Hart bent down. "This your work?" Eliza nodded. "And this?" He motioned to a woman sleeping under a boiled wool blanket, face spotted with fading rash, a cloth wrapped around her head, soaked in vinegar. "Yes. You know exactly what you're doing. I've known since I was 23. Hart stood again and faced her. And yet no valid license in this territory. Not even a temporary waiver. "You realize I have the authority to shut you down." Miri looked up from the stove, her eyes sharp. "Then shut us down and watch your name fill the graves." Hart glanced at her, mildly surprised. "Eliza Nez has saved half the town," Miri said. "And you come with ink and paper while people cough up their lungs." Hart didn't reply. He turned and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Eliza asked. "To see the rest," he said. "The mine, the barracks, the council. I want to know if this is necessity or theater." The door shut behind him. Eliza leaned against the table, her knees finally shaking. Miri handed her a cloth. "You handled that well. I handled it like a woman who's run out of places to run." "You think he'll shut you down?" Eliza looked toward the door. "If he does, he'll have to step over bodies to do it." The town's mood shifted with the inspector's arrival. Word spread faster than fever. Some folk muttered outside the general store, eyes following her when she passed, suspicion reignited. Others, those who had felt her hands stop bleeding or watched her bend over a child in the night, stood a little closer when they saw her nodding in silence. But the whispers crept in like dust under the door. "Witch doctor. Snake in a dress. She ain't natural." That storm hit when she arrived, didn't it? It didn't take long for the fear to find its voice. Eliza was walking back from the well when the first stone hit. It struck her shoulder sharp and fast. She stumbled, nearly dropping the bucket. "Go back to Boston!" a voice shouted from behind a fence. She turned. A woman stood there, thin-lipped, eyes hard with something more than anger. 2 children peeked from behind her skirts. Eliza didn't answer. She picked up the bucket and kept walking. At the clinic, she set the water down with more force than needed. Miri looked up. "They're turning," Eliza said. "One cough, and they forget every life I pulled from the edge. They're scared. They weren't scared when I was stitching their husbands back together. Now suddenly, I'm something to run from." Miri crossed her arms. "You think they love me either?" "A woman with herbs and prayers, speaking 2 tongues and carrying desert roots in my pockets?" Eliza exhaled hard. "They say you're cursed," Miri said softly. "But I say a storm can wash clean just as much as it destroys." Eliza looked at her. "You still believe in that, I believe in you." She couldn't say thank you. Her throat wouldn't let her. That night, the wind howled across the plains, stirring up red dust and slamming shutters. The town held its breath. The typhus had slowed, but the fear had not. Every cough was a gunshot. Every stranger a ghost. In the morning, Deputy Crow knocked on the clinic door. "He's called a meeting," he said. "Hart, council chamber, midday." Eliza looked up from a sleeping child's bedside. "Did he say what for? No. But I've seen that man's kind before. Federal spine, territorial pride. They don't like what they can't put in a box." "I'm not a box kind of woman," I noticed. He touched the brim of his hat and left. At midday, the hall was packed again. Hart stood near the front, hands behind his back, posture stiff with control. He waited until the room quieted. "I've completed my inspection," he said. "Visited homes, quarantine sites, the mine camp. Spoken to council members. Reviewed patient cases and procedures. Every breath in the room seemed to hitch. I've read the complaint filed against Miss Eliza Nez. It includes references to a revoked medical license in Boston, improper surgery, the death of a patient, and a forced resignation." Gasps rippled. Eliza stood head high. "I don't deny it," she said. "A woman died. I operated too late. Her husband was wealthy, powerful. He made sure I paid for it." "You make it sound noble," someone muttered. "No," Eliza said. "It wasn't noble. It was hard. And it cost me everything." Hart raised a hand. "Despite the accusations and the lack of licensure, I cannot ignore the results I've seen here. Nor can I justify removing the only effective practitioner during an active epidemic." A beat passed. "I am granting Miss Nez a temporary license emergency issue only pending further review. She will work under supervision. Documentation will be required. Oversight will continue." Eliza exhaled slowly. Her knees almost buckled. Mary stood and clapped once. Others followed. Not all, but enough. Daniel caught her eye from the back of the room. He didn't smile, just nodded once like a man acknowledging a storm had passed, at least for now. After the meeting, Hart approached her. "This isn't a pardon." "I know. You're still under scrutiny. I've lived under worse." He handed her the paper. "Don't waste this." As he walked away, Eliza looked down at the license. Her name, her title, her right to save lives restored, if only for a while. She folded it carefully, slipped it into her coat, and turned toward the wind. It wasn't over, but she wasn't hiding anymore. "If you want my help, leave your pride at the door and hand me the scalpel." The knock came before dawn. Heavy, fast, urgent. Eliza stirred from the cot behind the clinic's back room, boots already halfway on. Mary blinked awake across from her, sitting up, hair braided down her back like a coil of black rope. Eliza Daniels' voice was sharp, cutting through the stillness. She swung open the door. He stood soaked in sweat dust caked along the collar of his shirt, panic behind his storm-gray eyes. "It's Lily," he said. "Clayton Mercer's daughter. She's in labor. Something's wrong." Eliza's pulse jumped. How far along? Too far to stall. "She's been crying out since midnight. The midwife's there, but..." He shook his head. "It ain't going right." Eliza turned to Mary, who was already moving. "Get the kit. We'll need towels, bandages, laudanum if it gets bad." "Already on it," Mary said, wrapping her shawl tight. They rode to the Mercer house on horseback. Daniel led the way. The sun was just a pink bruise behind the clouds. Dust lifted around them, hanging in the air like unease. Inside the grandest home in Red Bluff, though still modest by city standards, Clayton Mercer paced the front parlor, jacket crumpled in his hands. When he saw Eliza, he froze. "You're here," he said, voice hollow. "Where is she?" "Upstairs." Screaming. He made no move to stop her, nor to help. Pride had drained out of him sometime in the night, replaced by helplessness. Eliza and Mary took the stairs 2 at a time. The bedroom reeked of sweat and fear. Lily Mercer lay on the bed, drenched, her face contorted in pain, fingers clawing at the bedsheets. The midwife stood at the foot of the bed, wringing her hands, eyes wide and blank. "She's been pushing for hours," the woman said, "but the baby won't come down." Eliza stepped past her. "You can go." The midwife hesitated. "I said go." She fled without another word. Eliza peeled back the covers. Blood stained the sheets. The baby's head was nowhere near the canal. Her hands moved fast, pressing, feeling for position. Breech. High. The worst kind. and Lily's body was exhausted. If the baby didn't move soon, both would die. Miri handed her the kit. "What are we doing?" "We're turning that baby. That's a death sentence if you get it wrong. I don't plan on getting it wrong." Lily moaned again, her voice shattering on the end like glass. Eliza knelt at her side. "Lily," she said gently. "Can you hear me?" The girl's eyes fluttered open. "It hurts. Mama. I want my mama." "She's gone, honey," Miri whispered. "But we're here. I want it to stop." Eliza met her gaze. "If I don't do something now, it won't stop. It'll get worse." Tears slipped down Lily's cheeks. "Do it," she whispered. "Please." Eliza turned to Miri. "Hold her still. This is going to feel like fire." She washed her hands, doused them in whiskey, then climbed onto the bed. Miri pressed Lily's shoulders down. Eliza reached inside, fingers trembling just once before instinct took over. She found the curve of the baby's spine, the tiny ribs pressing upward, the shoulder blocking the path. She breathed in, then pushed. Lily screamed. The sound was raw, primal. Daniel, standing just outside the door, turned away and slammed his fist into the wall. Eliza blocked it out. Her world narrowed to her hands, the unborn life inside, and the mother barely holding on. Bit by bit, she coaxed the baby into a turn, guiding the shoulder, the torso, then finally the head. "I've got it," she said, voice hoarse. Miri moved quickly, lifting Lily's knees, bracing her as another contraction overtook her. Eliza held her breath. Then the baby crowned. The birth came like a flood after the drought, fast, messy, alive. A long moment passed, then a cry split the air. Tiny, strong, a girl. Eliza caught the child, wrapped her in a towel, cleared her nose and mouth, and handed her off to Miri. Lily sobbed, her arms reaching out, her strength spent. "She's okay," Eliza whispered. "You both are." Downstairs, Clayton Mercer sat in a chair like a man who had weathered an earthquake. When Eliza descended the stairs, blood on her sleeves, exhaustion written in every line of her face, he stood shakily. "Well," he asked. "She's alive," Eliza said. "So is your granddaughter." He blinked hard, then covered his face with one hand. A breath rattled out of him. "Thank you. I didn't do it for you." "No," he said quietly. "You did it because it was right." He looked up, and something in his face had shifted, cracked open maybe. The iron had melted just enough to let something human through. "I was wrong about you," he said. "And I don't have enough years left to pay back what you just did." Eliza stared at him. "If you want to do something for me, remember this next time someone tries to silence me." He nodded once, solemn. They left the Mercer house in the quiet before sunrise. The wind had calmed. The sky turned soft and wide, the color of milk and clay. Eliza walked beside Daniel. Neither spoke for a long time. He finally said, "I've never seen anyone do what you did up there." She didn't answer. "You put your hands where most wouldn't put their thoughts." Still, she said nothing. Then he added, "But that wasn't just medicine. That was something else. Something more. I didn't have a choice. You did. You always do." They reached the clinic. She paused on the steps. "Thank you," she said. Daniel looked at her, brows drawn. "For what?" "For not stopping me." "I thought about it." He said, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Why didn't you?" He shrugged. "Maybe I wanted to see if all those rumors about you were true." "And they were wrong," he said. "You're far more dangerous than they said." Eliza laughed, the sound surprising even her. Inside, Miri had already cleaned the tools. The child slept in a makeshift crib made from an apple crate and a blanket. Peace had returned to the clinic, but it wouldn't last. Not in Red Bluff. Later that morning, as Eliza boiled water for another round of linens, Deputy Crow stepped into the doorway. "Got a letter for you," he said, holding out an envelope. Her name was inked in a hand she knew too well. She opened it. The seal of the Boston Medical Board. A single sentence. "Pending formal review, your temporary license is subject to revocation if complaints are confirmed." Eliza folded it neatly. Then she dropped it in the fire. "Let her show you," she said. "Come with us. See it." The wind whipped through the empty streets of Red Bluff as Eliza stood outside the clinic, arms folded, boots planted in the red dust that still hadn't settled. The letter from Boston was nothing but ashes now, but the threat in its words lingered like smoke in her lungs. She could still hear the faint crackle as it burned, still feel the sting of what it meant. She'd bought herself time, not safety. Mary stood nearby, her shawl tight around her shoulders, eyes watching the horizon. Crow leaned against the hitching post across the way, sharpening his knife on a whetstone like always. Quiet, unbothered, except his eyes were sharp as ever. "You're not going to stop, are you?" Mary asked, voice low. Eliza shook her head. "If I stop, someone dies. That inspector's still sniffing around. Let him sniff." The council had called a second meeting, not because they wanted to, because the town was pressing them, each person weighed down by the smell of bleach and boiled water, the absence of comfort, and the fear that the worst wasn't over yet. By noon, the chapel-turned hall was full again. This time there were more coughs in the room, more pale faces, more wary eyes. Eliza walked in alone. Daniel had offered to come. So had Mary. But she needed them outside, showing the town they still had work to do. That fear hadn't won yet. Clayton Mercer sat with the council, looking like a man stuck between two walls closing in. Lucian Hart, the inspector, stood with arms crossed beside him, expression unreadable. Rosalind Crane, the only councilwoman, banged the table lightly. "Miss Nez, we asked you here because complaints have continued to reach us, some from Boston, some local. People want clarity." "Clarity," Eliza repeated, stepping forward. "You want to know if I am who I say I am, if I'm dangerous, if I should be here." The room buzzed. She didn't wait for them to quiet. "Fine. I'll give you clarity." She raised her voice. "I'm the woman who set a boy's leg while the mine bled out its lungs. I'm the one who stitched heads and drained lungs and boiled water while your hands shook. I'm the one who walked into the Mercer house and pulled a baby out of a dying girl without blinking. I'm the one keeping the fever from burning this town to ash." She looked each council member in the eye. "I am not licensed, not yet. Boston saw to that. A man with power lost his wife. He needed someone to blame. And I was easy. A woman. Young. Alone." Murmurs swelled. She could see some eyes shift, not to doubt her, but to understand. "I didn't come here to deceive. I came here to vanish. But people started dying, and I couldn't let that happen, not if I could stop it." Lucian Hart stepped forward. "Then explain why people are still sick. If what you're doing is so effective, why are we still seeing fevers? Because medicine isn't magic," Eliza snapped. "You can treat 100 and lose one. You can isolate and still miss the breath that carried it. But I'll tell you what happens if I stop 10 become 20. 20 become graves." Rosalind turned to the council. "We've seen the barracks. We've seen the quarantine stations. She's right about the risk." Councilman Roy Keller, the blacksmith turned official, cleared his throat. "Some say she brought it here." No, Crow said from the back of the room. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut clean through the noise. "It came here like every sickness does, on boots and breath. She's the one who didn't run from it." Lucian Hart looked toward Mercer. "You've been quiet." Clayton leaned forward slowly. I watched her save my daughter, he said, and I've buried men before. I know the difference between someone doing harm and someone standing between us and the grave. She stays. Another cough broke out in the room. People shifted uneasily. Eliza took a deep breath. Let me show you, she said. Come with us. See it. Rosalind nodded. Take us to the source. That afternoon, she led a group of council members, townsfolk, and the inspector through the town's edge past the scorched quilts and scrubbed porches to the far lean-to turned infirmary. The worst of the sick were housed there now, beyond the main thoroughfare where the air was thick with sweat and steam. Inside, women moved like shadows, pouring water, changing linens, wringing out cloths. Children dozed, skin pink with rash. Men lay still under white sheets, only the rise and fall of their chests showing life. Eliza moved among them, touching shoulders, checking pulses. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Miri handed her a fresh cloth, nodding silently. Lucian Hart looked around slowly. His notebook remained closed. Later outside, he pulled her aside. You've created something functional, he admitted. Better than what I've seen in settlements 3 times this size. She waited. But that doesn't change the law, he added. You are still unlicensed in the eyes of the territorial board. Temporary or not, you're practicing beyond what's permitted. I'm not asking for permission, Eliza said. Just time. Hart stared at her. Then after a long moment, he nodded once. I'll file a recommendation to extend your temporary license, but it'll come with String's daily reports, oversight review within 30 days. I can live with that. You'll have to. She watched him walk away. The sun was starting to dip behind the ridge. Daniel stood at the corner wiping sawdust from his hands. Did you win? He asked. No, Eliza said, but I didn't lose. He smiled faintly. I'll take that. They walked back toward the clinic together. Dust swirled around their boots. The air had turned colder. By the time they reached the porch, a rider was galloping in, fast shouting before he even reached the hitching post. It's Jack Holloway, he cried. He's burning up rash, all over coughing blood. Eliza dropped her bag and turned to run. Miri caught up beside her, eyes wide. It's spreading again, she said. No, Eliza whispered. It's changing. Inside the Holloway cabin, Jack was shaking so hard the bed rattled beneath him. His lips were cracked, his eyes glassy. When Eliza pulled back his shirt, she saw the telltale signs, deep crimson spots scattered across his chest, shoulders, down his spine. She stepped back, heart thudding. Miri's breath caught beside her. Eliza turned to her voice, low and tight. It's not just typhus anymore. Something else is riding in with it. Miri nodded slowly. Then we need to prepare. Eliza looked down at Jack's body and realized they weren't through the worst yet. They were only just beginning. He'll die if we don't cut it out now, Eliza said. It's spreading too fast. The air inside the clinic was thick with heat and fear. Jack Holloway's breathing rattled like dry leaves caught in a gutter. His shirt clung to him, soaked through, and the strange crimson rash had darkened into angry purple bruising that crawled toward his ribs. Every breath he took was a struggle, each exhale thinner than the last. Miri gripped the basin, her knuckles white. You really think it's an abscess? I know it is, Eliza said. I've seen this once before in a railroad camp outside Santa Fe. The bacteria clusters deep near the lungs. If we don't lance it, it'll suffocate him from the inside. Crow leaned over the cot, brow furrowed. You do this. He might not make it anyway. If I don't, he won't make it at all. Daniel stepped in from the porch, shutting the door behind him. I sent word to the surrounding homesteads. Told him to stay put until we figure this out. Eliza nodded, pulling on her gloves. Miri, boil everything again, twice, and pour whiskey over the blade before I cut. Miri moved quickly, years of following Eliza's lead making her precise even under pressure. The room fell quiet, except for Jack's shallow breaths and the soft crackle of the fire keeping the tools sterile. Eliza sat on the edge of the cot, looked Jack in the eye, and said softly, "Hold on. I'm not letting go." The moment her blade pierced the skin, Jack jerked violently. Crow held him down with iron strength, while Eliza worked blood and pus spilling into the cloth she'd placed. The smell was foul but familiar. She'd dealt with infection before, but this was worse. Thicker, angrier. "Pressure's building," she said. "I need to go deeper. You're in the lung field," Crow warned. "I know," she said, steadying her hand. Time slowed. Each movement was deliberate. She opened the cavity just enough to insert the tube Miri handed her, allowing the buildup to drain. For a long moment, it seemed like nothing changed. Then Jack took a full breath. A long, clean inhale. Miri gasped. "He's breathing." Crow exhaled. Daniel crossed himself without a word. Eliza leaned back, chest heaving. "Keep him warm. Give him broth when he wakes." "You think he'll wake?" Miri asked. "He's already halfway back," Eliza murmured. "Now we wait." She stepped outside into the cool dusk, blood on her apron and the weight of decision still clinging to her. Daniel followed, his face drawn. "They're scared again," he said quietly. "I am too," Eliza admitted. Daniel looked over the porch rail toward the ridge where the last of the sun painted the sky in burnt orange. "The fever's changed, but the town hasn't. They're still not sure who to follow, who to trust." She sat on the steps, elbows on her knees. "I didn't come here to lead, just to survive." "Well, you're doing both now," he said, "whether you want to or not." That night, Miri and Crow took shifts watching Jack while Eliza finally closed her eyes in the corner of the clinic. Her dreams were full of shadowed figures and burning letters of corridors in the Boston hospital, echoing with footsteps and judgment. She woke to shouting. Daniel flung the door open. "More cases," he said, breathless. 3 on the north edge of town. Same rash, same cough. Eliza was on her feet instantly. "Quarantine them, same protocol." "Miri already packing supplies," she said, appearing behind Daniel. Crow stood near the back, checking his rifle. "If it spreads past the edge, we lose containment." "Then we don't let it spread," Eliza said. They moved like a unit, instincts honed by fear and resolve. At the north edge, a mother and 2 children lay huddled in a lean-to. The youngest, barely 6, had blue lips and a trembling jaw. Eliza bent down, checking vitals. "This is moving faster. It's mutating with each host. We need help," Miri said. "We are the help," Eliza replied, but the words tasted bitter in her mouth. Back at the clinic, Lucian Hart was waiting. His boots were dusty from travel, his coat creased from the saddle. "I heard the fever's changing." "It's worse," Eliza said. "And it's spreading again." He pulled out a notepad. "I've filed your temporary license request. It was expedited. You've got 30 days. That's not long. It's all they'll give. Boston doesn't like renegades, no matter how many lives you save." Eliza crossed her arms. They never did. Hart's face softened slightly. "Tell me what you need." "Access to the railroad clinic stores. Vials, antibiotics, whatever's left." He nodded. "I can make that happen." "And if I find a cure," she asked, "then I'll make sure they hear about it." By late evening, the clinic was at capacity. The townsfolk who once whispered about Eliza's past now lined up outside her door, holding sick children or wheezing elders. Rosalind Crane arrived with baskets of bread and boiled roots, her sleeves rolled and apron stained. "I brought more hands," she said, "and I'm not asking." "I wouldn't stop you," Eliza replied, a rare smile breaking through. They worked through the night, cutting fever, managing fluids, separating the sickest from the rest. Miri organized the ledger, documenting each symptom. Crow stayed posted at the door, rifle in hand. And Daniel moved through the chaos like a steady beam of light, lifting when others fell, holding when they couldn't. Sometime before dawn, Eliza slipped out to the edge of town. The stars above Red Bluff were blinding, but she didn't look up. She stared at the dark ridge in the distance where the old trail wound down into the canyon, where the traders once passed through, and where the first outbreaks had started. "It's in the water," she said aloud, realization dawning. Heart had followed her. What, it's not just breath, it's waterborne. The fever's mutated with something from the runoff, from upstream. Heart swore, "You sure know, but I will be. And if I'm right, then every person pulling water from the canyon springs is already exposed." Heart straightened. "Then we shut it down." "We'll need proof," Eliza said. "Samples. Testing. I'll get you what you need." She turned to him, her voice low and fierce. "I'm not going to lose this town. Not to Boston. Not to disease. Not to silence." Hart nodded. "Then let's raise hell." They walked back together, two shadows in the early light, the town still trembling behind them, but alive. For now. Sometimes the cure is heavier than the illness, but if we carry it together, it won't break us. The silence inside the canyon was almost wholly broken, only by the soft drip of water off limestone and the distant rustle of dry grass. Eliza crouched beside the stream, gloved fingers dipping a vial into the current. The glass caught a shimmer of moonlight as she sealed it, her face drawn in tight concentration. Beside her, Hart stood, watch revolver holstered, but his hand never far from it. The canyon spring, once a place where settlers quenched their thirst on the trail west, now held the town's greatest threat. Eliza had traced the infections to families drawing water downstream, those not connected to the main well. The old settlers had warned of copper and sulfur leaching into the riverbed, but no one had listened. Until now. "We'll need a base test," she said, labeling the vial. "Control sample from the town well. Miri can help with the rest back in the lab." "You sure this is it?" Hart asked. "I'm not sure of anything anymore," Eliza admitted. "But I know the symptoms line up with waterborne variants I saw near Durango. That infection didn't move through breath, it clung to the gut, the lungs, the bloodstream. This one's smarter." Hart looked down the canyon where shadows pooled like ink. "We'll ride back quiet. No need to scare folks more than they already are." By dawn, they returned to Red Bluff, the town already stirring. The fever hadn't slowed. Smoke drifted from the clinic chimney, a signal that work never stopped inside. Inside, Crow was leaning against the wall, eyes bloodshot but alert. "You were right," he said as soon as Eliza stepped inside. "Another 3 came in overnight. All used the North Spring." Miri emerged from the side room, arms full of rags and bloodied linens, and one of them showing signs of organ failure. Eliza didn't pause. "We'll run the tests. Hart, you still have access to the telegraph office." He nodded. "Code channels open. What do you need?" "Send for samples to be compared with riverborne typhus and arsenic contamination. Use the code from my Boston days." Hart raised an eyebrow. "Still works. It better," she said. By midday, Eliza had filled 2 more vials. Miri prepped the microscope, carefully adjusting the lens. Crow sat in the corner reading her notes, while Daniel paced the porch like a sentinel. Then came the bang. A fist hit the clinic door so hard it rattled the frame. "Open up," a voice barked. "We want the truth." Eliza opened it to find Elias Baines, the town smith, red-faced and furious. Behind him stood nearly a dozen townsfolk, many of whom had once shunned her entirely. "What truth?" she asked. Baines stepped forward. "My son's coughing up blood. You said you could fix this. Now folks say you're poking around water and running tests. Are you saying the sickness is in our springs?" "I'm saying it might be," she replied calmly. "And if it is, we can stop it. You should have told us. I did through every person we warned to boil water to avoid the stream to use the main well. You weren't listening." His hand clenched. "You keep secrets, Doctor." That word doctor hung between them. It had once been spoken with suspicion. Now it came heavy with bitter expectation. "I don't keep secrets," Eliza said. "I give facts when I have them. And right now I'm close to something that could save your boy." The crowd murmured, unsure. Daniel stepped beside her. If she wanted to run, she'd have done it weeks ago. But she's still here, fighting for us. Baines stared at Eliza a long moment, then backed down, nodding once. "Just fix this." "We will," she said. "But I need time, and I need trust." As the crowd dispersed, Eliza returned to the lab where Miri had frozen in place. "You need to see this," Miri whispered. Eliza stepped behind the microscope and stared. The water sample glowed faintly under the lens, but what caught her attention were the swirling threads, filaments of bacteria forming chains, branching like veins. "This isn't typhus," she muttered. "It's something new. Or something old," Miri said. "Reawakened." They cross-checked with old samples, flipping through Eliza's notebooks, filled with inked sketches and margins full of ideas. She found one match barely legible, dated 3 years ago, from her work in Arizona mining towns. "Mine runoff," she whispered. "Heavy metals bonded with bacteria. It mutated underground, latched onto iron veins. We treated it with compound salts and an alkaline solution." "We have salts," Miri said, "but not the rest." "Then we make do," Eliza replied. "Start boiling it down. Crow gather limestone powder. We'll attempt a filter prototype." As they worked, Daniel brought news. More families were showing signs, and the well once believed safe had lower flow than before. Panic simmered beneath the town's surface. That night, Eliza stood in the darkened clinic with the prototype filter beside her, and her notes spread out like a battlefield. She'd known medicine would cost her. But this was war. Crow entered quietly. "Folks are waiting. For what? For a sign that you still believe we can beat this." She turned to him, weariness and fire flickering in her gaze. "I don't have the cure. Not yet. But I know the path to it." Crow stepped forward. "Then lead us, even if it kills us." Morning came cold and raw. The treatment began. They administered filtered water to the most recent victims alongside antiseptics and nutrient-rich broths. The first signs were small, a deeper breath here, color returning there. But signs nonetheless. The town held its breath. Then from the back room a child's voice, "Mama, I'm thirsty." It was Baines's son, awake, speaking. Rosalind wept where she stood. Even Crow had to turn away. Eliza didn't smile, not yet, but she nodded to Miri and said double the doses, and boil everything. Word spread like wildfire, a flicker of hope after weeks of fear. People returned not just with the sick, but with offers. Blankets, food, a wagon for the clinic. Even old Miss Tilly brought over herbs from her root cellar. Still, Eliza wasn't finished. She sat late that night with heart combing over the canyon's history. Maps, water lines, mining routes. She traced the lines back to an old shaft north of Red Bluff, now buried beneath brush and thyme. "It's leaking into the stream," she said. The whole mutation began there. Hart exhaled slowly. You want to go there? I need to, she said. The source is still active, and if we don't seal it, this town's just waiting for the next outbreak. He nodded. We leave at first light. As she closed her notes, Eliza glanced at the candle burning low beside her. The wax curled like petals melting into the table's cracks. She remembered the quote her father once told her long ago in a Boston study filled with medical books and dusty light. Sometimes the cure is heavier than the illness, but if we carry it together, it won't break us. And for the first time in weeks, Eliza believed that might be true. The land remembers what we bury, and sometimes it spits it back out twice as angry. The wind cut across the ridge like a blade, carrying with it the metallic tang of minerals and the memory of something buried long ago. Eliza pulled her scarf tighter over her mouth as she and Hart stood at the edge of the overgrown gulch. It was hard to believe the entrance to the old Red Bluff mine was just beneath their boots, hidden beneath a mess of thornbrush, broken rock, and time. I saw this place once, Hart murmured. Back when I was 13. My brother dared me to sneak in. The miners had just left it abandoned. Said the ground went sour. Eliza crouched beside a collapsed beam, brushing away debris with gloved hands. The soil wasn't just sour. It was poisoned. The runoff carried the toxins down into the water table, and now it's mixing with something biological, something that shouldn't have survived. You're sure this is the source? The infection's origin isn't in town. It's here, she said, tapping the exposed pipe, trickling a murky stream into the ravine. The water smells faintly of sulfur, and there's biofilm forming around the rocks. I need to test it, but I'd stake my life on it. Hart adjusted his rifle strap. That's exactly what you're doing. A distant rumble echoed, and both froze. It wasn't thunder. It was a cart, wooden wheels, clattering over stone. They turned to see Crow and Miri arriving, a makeshift wagon hitched to two tired mules. You said to bring gear, Crow called, climbing down. Got picks, rope lime, and 3 flasks of strong whiskey in case we run out of courage. Miri handed Eliza a set of clean glass vials. And I brought your old distillation rig from the clinic. We can set it up at the ridge. They worked in tense silence, each task done with swift precision. As Eliza poured samples and documented pH readings, she noticed something odd: pockets of warmth in the earth. Not steam exactly, but warmth. Like the mine was still exhaling. I don't like this, she muttered. Neither do I, Hart agreed. Still, they pressed on. By mid-afternoon, they'd uncovered part of the shaft. The wooden beams groaned with age, but they held barely. Eliza clipped a lantern to her coat and ducked inside first, moving with careful, deliberate steps. The mine was, as she feared, rotting support beams, slick floors, and stagnant air, thick with minerals and mold. But deeper in, near a collapsed tunnel, she found it: the shimmer. A wet, iridescent sludge coated the walls, pulsating faintly in the dark like living oil. This isn't just runoff, she whispered. It's reacting to something. Miri crouched beside her. Alive, maybe more. They took samples and backed out, none of them speaking, until the daylight hit their faces again. Outside, Eliza turned the vial in her hand, watching the strange liquid glint. If this is part biological, we might be dealing with a hybrid, mineral-induced mutation. The heat down there, it's accelerating it. The infection doesn't just live in water anymore. It's adapting. Crow's face darkened. How do you stop something that keeps changing? We cut it off at the source, she said. Seal the mine completely. Pour lime-burn sulfur, collapse the tunnel if we have to. Hart looked uneasy. You'd risk another cave-in. It's not a risk, it's a necessity. If we leave it open, this town's future will be poisoned. They worked through the evening, with Crow and Hart hammering support stakes and Eliza coordinating the setup of sulfur canisters. The plan was clear: burn the infection out, seal the mine with packed dirt and lime, and monitor the stream for changes. Just before ignition, Eliza paused beside the entrance. The sunset cast the canyon in blood-orange hues, and a hawk circled high overhead. She turned to Miri. "We're not just treating a disease. We're undoing what greed once did to this land." Miri nodded slowly. "And maybe to ourselves." Eliza lit the first fuse, the hiss of fire sharp in the silence. The blast came seconds later, a muffled roar that shook the ground and sent dust billowing skyward. The mine groaned in protest, before collapsing in on itself, sealing centuries of damage under stone and fire. Back in Red Bluff, the town was gathered near the clinic when they returned, faces anxious, hopeful. Rosalind approached first, her hands clasped tightly over her heart. "Did you find it?" she asked. Eliza nodded. "It's done. The source is sealed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Relief, gratitude, but still questions. "What now?" someone asked. Eliza stepped forward. "Now we wait. We watch the water. We continue the treatments. But most of all, we remember. The land remembers what we bury. Sometimes it spits it back out twice as angry. But if we listen, maybe we don't have to repeat our mistakes." Crow raised a hand. "Let her rest. Let all of us rest. We've still got work, but the tide's turning." That night, Eliza sat outside the clinic, a mug of bitter coffee in her hands. Hart joined her, easing down beside her on the bench. "You know they're calling you the miracle woman now," he said. "I'm no miracle," she murmured. "Just stubborn. You could have left. Plenty of times." "I know." He looked out over the darkened street. "So why stay?" Eliza was quiet a moment before replying. "Because they matter. Because they listened when it counted. And because the land doesn't just remember pain. It remembers healing, too." She watched the stars come out slowly, deliberately, as if uncertain whether they were welcome. And far off down the canyon trail, the stream still ran. Clearer now. Quieter. But not forgotten. The real cure had only just begun. "You can save their lives, Eliza, but only if you trust them with yours." The sky over Red Bluff was gray with the hush of an impending storm, thick clouds coiling above the town like a warning. Inside the clinic, the air was tense, heavier than the sulfur-laced dust that used to drift down from the mine. This time, the threat wasn't hidden deep beneath the earth, it was in the people. The mutated illness had spread faster than expected. Though they'd sealed the mine, the pathogen had already taken root in the bloodstream of more than a dozen townsfolk. What began as fever and aches had turned into hallucinations, muscle convulsions, even comas. Eliza had seen similar patterns once back in St. Louis during a typhoid outbreak. But this was worse. It mutated faster than anything she'd studied, and it was adapting to every treatment she threw at it. Rosalind was one of the first to show new symptoms. She lay in the back room, her breath rattling, eyes darting under closed lids like she was trapped inside some fevered dream. Miri sat beside her, fingers wrapped tightly around her rosary beads, lips moving in silent prayer. Eliza paced the front hall, her notes spread across the counter. Her mind raced with chemical ratios, botanical compounds, every possible treatment she could synthesize with the limited supplies they had. She had a hypothesis: a serum derived from hyalicin wild garlic combined with mineral-binding agents might slow the mutation. But there was no time left for trial and error. Hart burst in rainwater streaming from his coat. "It's spreading. Tom Petty just collapsed near the well. 2 kids are running high fevers. And Sheriff Cade, he's gone delirious." Eliza's heart tightened. I need more time. We don't have it. Crow followed close behind, breathless mud on his boots. The town's looking to you, Eliza. They think you've got the answer. She stared down at her trembling hands. I have a theory, but it hasn't been tested. If it goes wrong, it could kill someone. Miri stood in the doorway, and if we do nothing, they'll die anyway. Eliza's shoulders sagged. It's not just about the medicine. This thing is evolving because it feeds on secrecy, on what we bury. It adapted to survive underground in silence. If we fight it with the same silence, we'll lose. Crow folded his arms. Then speak. I'm not just a nurse from back east, she said, her voice shaking. I trained as a physician, top of my class. I had a future, a practice. But the moment I became a mail-order bride, I gave up the right to be seen as a doctor, especially out here. Miri stepped forward. You didn't give it up. They just wouldn't let you keep it. Hart's eyes locked on hers. You can save their lives, Eliza, but only if you trust them with yours. The storm outside cracked like a cannon, and Eliza made her decision. By nightfall, the town hall had been cleared. Cots lined the walls, each holding someone shivering or sweating or lost in fever dreams. Eliza stood before the town, the vials of her hastily brewed serum in a crate beside her. I'm not asking for trust, she began. I'm asking for a chance. This serum isn't perfect, but it's the best we've got. I'll take the first dose myself. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Hart stepped forward, holding a glass of water as she injected the cloudy mixture into her own arm. The pain came fast, burning through her veins like fire laced with ice. She gritted her teeth, body shivering as sweat beaded on her brow. Then slowly, it eased. I'm still standing, she said softly. Now let's get to work. Crow helped organize the volunteers. Hart carried patients in one by one. Miri cleaned wounds, stabilized fevers, whispered comfort where she could. Eliza moved like a storm of her own, administering doses, monitoring vitals, and writing down every reaction. She lost one, an elderly man named Amos. The serum came too late for him, but Rosalind. Her eyes fluttered open. Sheriff Cade's tremors stilled. Tom Petty sat up, dazed but alive. By dawn, the storm had passed, and so had the worst of the crisis. Outside, the streets of Red Bluff were washed clean. The dust, the fear, the doubt rinsed away by rain and blood and truth. Eliza sat on the steps of the clinic, her body aching, hands stained with iodine and ink. Hart came and sat beside her without a word. I thought they'd turn on me, she murmured. But they didn't. No, they brought water, bandages, helped carry the weak. Even old man Harlan volunteered. Hart chuckled. That man barely gets out of his rocking chair. He helped Rosalind to the clinic, she said, smiling faintly. People surprise you. Hart watched her a moment. So what now, Dr. Eliza May? She closed her eyes, letting the morning sun warm her face. Now I stop hiding. Crow walked up, his hat in his hands, eyes bloodshot but kind. Folks are already talking. Say maybe we need a real doctor in town, someone with spine and sense. You think they'll still want me when they know I lied? They already do, he said. They saw who you were when it counted. That's what they'll remember. Eliza looked down the road leading out of town, its muddy tracks now firming under the sunlight. For the first time, she didn't want to leave. She didn't need to prove herself elsewhere. She'd already done it right here in Red Bluff. Inside the clinic, Miri was laughing with Rosalind. Crow had begun repairing the windows that had cracked in the chaos. And Hart. Hart hadn't left her side. The storm had broken more than the fever. It had broken the dam of silence she'd built around her life. and through the cracks, something new was growing. Truth, belonging, a place to heal not just others but herself. And Red Bluff, scarred as it was, had begun to heal too. I didn't just come here to survive, Hart. I came here to live and to love without apology. The air smelled of summer sage and rain-soaked soil as Red Bluff came back to life. After weeks of crisis, the town began stitching itself together with quiet resilience. Storefronts reopened. The chapel bell rang again on Sundays. Laughter returned to the saloon, not forced or fearful but genuine. Even the horses seemed calmer, hooves striking the ground with less urgency. At the clinic, Eliza opened the shutters wide each morning, letting sunlight pour in. No longer a shadowy sanctuary of secrets, it had become a beacon. A place of healing, and maybe more important, a place of truth. She walked into the front room, her apron speckled with ink and herbs, and found Miri hunched over a ledger. The young woman looked up with a grin, curls escaping her braid. "You were right," Miri said. "The town council voted. You've been officially appointed as the town's physician. They even offered to build an extension for a real surgery room." Eliza smiled as she took a seat across from her. "They'll want someone who can manage patients without alarming the livestock." "They want you, Eliza." The words settled in her chest, like warmth from a hearth. For so long she had expected exile with every truth told. But in Red Bluff, truth had opened doors, not closed them. Later that afternoon, as she checked on Rosalind, who was now up and fussing about not being allowed to return to baking, Eliza found herself glancing toward the window where Hart stood in the street talking to Crow. She watched the way Hart's hand rested on the horse's mane, calm and steady, the way he tipped his head back when he laughed, and how he stole a glance at the window just to catch sight of her watching. When the clinic quieted down, Eliza wandered outside. Hart was leaning on the corral fence, watching the sun dip low across the canyon ridge. "I hear you've been promoted," he said without turning. "Only slightly. Town doctor instead of that stubborn woman with too many books." Hart chuckled. "Progress." She leaned beside him, the fading orange light brushing her face. "Hart, I owe you more than thanks. You saw me for who I was before anyone else did." He turned toward her, eyes softened. "You never owed me anything, but if you're offering, I'll take honesty." "What now, Eliza? What do you want?" She hesitated, heart thudding. So many of her choices had been shaped by survival, escape from a past, safety from judgment. But standing here rooted in the red soil of this rough, kind town, something deeper bloomed in her chest. "I didn't just come here to survive, Hart," she said quietly. "I came here to live and to love without apology." His gaze didn't flinch. "Are you saying that to the sky or to me? Am I too?" She stepped closer, so close their hands touched. "To you." It wasn't a grand gesture. No sweeping kiss or crowd of onlookers. Just two people in the quiet moment after chaos, finally speaking plainly. Hart reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Then, I guess it's time you saw this." He handed it to her, an envelope addressed to her in her own handwriting. Her heart skipped. It was the letter she'd sent with her application as a mail-order bride. The one she thought had been thrown out. "I never told you," he said. "When I read this, I knew you weren't what you claimed to be. You wrote with precision, confidence. The kind of clarity I've only seen in one other person, my mother, who was a battlefield nurse." Eliza's hands trembled. "Why didn't you say anything? I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." "And you did." She laughed through her tears. "You're infuriating, better than terrifying." "That too." In the days that followed, the town honored its quiet heroes. Crow reopened his livery with new safety rules, helmets and all. Rosalind insisted on teaching Miri how to bake proper sourdough, and Old Man Harlan declared he'd donate his dusty piano to the schoolhouse before these kids forget how to feel something other than panic. Eliza's clinic became more than a building. It became a cornerstone, not just because of the medicine she practiced, but because of the way she listened, the way she looked people in the eye, and didn't judge their fears. The people of Red Bluff didn't forget the danger, but they remembered who stood with them in it. One warm evening, as fireflies danced in the brush and laughter echoed from the saloon porch, Eliza sat with Hart beneath a juniper tree, a quilt wrapped around their shoulders. "I used to think my worth came from my title," she said softly. "From whether someone said doctor or just wife. But out here, it comes from what I do with my hands, my words, my choices." Hart took her hand, rough thumb brushing across her knuckles. "Then you've chosen well." She leaned her head against his shoulder, breath steady. "I thought I had to prove myself to be accepted," she whispered. "But really, I just had to stop hiding." The wind carried the scent of mesquite and new grass. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hooted low. Hart pressed a kiss to her temple. "So what do we build next?" Eliza looked up at the stars. A life. The moon rose high over Red Bluff, silvering the rooftops and softening the scars of all that had passed. And in that quiet town, wrapped in the hush of promise, Eliza finally felt something she hadn't in years. Home. The educational lesson learned from this story is that a person's true worth is revealed not by titles, past mistakes, or the judgment of others, but by how they choose to serve when it matters most. Life may force us to start over later than we expected, but dignity and purpose can still be rebuilt through steady work, honesty, and compassion. Trust grows slowly, especially in hard times, yet it often deepens when people stand together instead of retreating into fear. Even in the later chapters of life, courage, integrity, and kindness remain the strongest medicines we can offer to others and to ourselves.